what's up? Sanisa, Super Bad Estrada here, and I just want to give a huge special shout out to the relay. Thank you so much for all of the continuous support, and thank you for all of the support during and after and before every single fight.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this, a continuation to a story we've been talking about a lot here on the channel. Chris Mannix tweeted, George Kambosos is seeking to have his purse for the fight against Teofimo Lopez placed in escrow. Sources familiar with the situation told Sports Illustrated now, Kambosos, who's still in Australia, is wary about Triller's ability to pay out after the fight. George Kambosos has sent a letter to the IBF accusing Triller of breach of contract and requesting that the sanctioning body declare that Triller has failed to comply with the contract.
That explains why he wants them to default.
It's because he's wary about Triller's ability to pay out after the fight, i.e., he doesn't think they got the money. Kambosos, in a letter sent from his attorney, Greg Smith, says Kambosos is ready, willing, and able to fight on October 4th, the originally scheduled date. Kambosos, as Sports Illustrated now reported, wanted Triller to put the money for the fight into escrow, as well as to honor prior marketing agreements that Triller had offered, then reneged on. In short, Kambosos has just blown up the fight against Lopez. Kambosos is also calling for Triller to be barred from future purse bids for its egregious behavior.
Story really is the gift that keeps on giving.
I'm telling you, boxing scribes and YouTubers alike won't be short of content so long as all of this is going on.
Mannix added,
there are indications that Matchroom, which had the next highest bid behind Triller, is interested in picking up Lopez versus Kambosos. Matchroom would not assume the October 16th date, but would target one in November, sources told Sports Illustrated. Now, another possibility on a card with Devin Haney, who is likely to fight before the end of the year.
I can't believe there was still more angles to cover in this story.
We've talked about the benefits of Triller defaulting on the fight, how the fight would no longer be a burden to Triller, and rest assured, it's a burden. It's a tough sell. You're trying to get back. You'd be trying to get back the $6 million you'd already invested in this thing if they got the fight over the line.
If things proceeded on schedule.
If you actually did have George Kambosos' signature and he were on board to move the fight to the 16th, you're not out of the woods yet. You still got to try to sell this thing, and it's a tough sell. Whereas if they defaulted, they'd lose that $1 million deposit, little over $1 million, but they could lose more than that actually trying to do the fight. So I think they'd be breathing a sigh of relief somewhat. You cut your losses and you lick your wounds and you move on. For us, it'd be beneficial if they defaulted because it wouldn't be a pay-per-view. It wouldn't come at an additional cost to me or you. We'd see it on either DAZN or ESPN.
I'm actually hoping they default.
And I'm actually hoping that the fight goes to Matchroom. Matchroom in particular, because that's going to be pretty fucking funny watching Bob Arum react to that.
Oh, I'm sure he'd be thrilled to hear it.
Just the other day, Bob Arum was making quips and comments about the size of Eddie Hearn's ego, but let's see the size of Bob's if Teofimo Lopez were to end up fighting on DAZN in a one-off situation for just one fight. Let's see how much of his composure.
He'd be fucking furious.
We'll see. We'll see if it happens that way. Though there are still other areas of this story, other angles that need to be addressed. In my previous video, we talked about some potential scenarios that led us here, because there's a conflict of interest, or I should say there was, having Peter Khan work as both an executive for Triller and a manager for George Kambosos, one of the fighters involved in the fight.
Peter stepped down as an executive a little over 2 weeks ago.
An executive for Triller, and we don't know why. A reason wasn't given.
George Kambosos is his fighter.
The George Kambosos that's making all these waves. The George Kambosos that has brought this fight, its progress, to a screeching halt. Could it be that the split between Peter Khan and Triller was less than amicable, and this is his way of sticking it to them by way of his fighter making all these waves? That's one scenario we talked about. Another scenario that we talked about is,
maybe Peter's doing this for Triller.
Maybe he parted ways with them publicly, and maybe that's what they want people to believe, but behind the scenes, what he's actually doing is coaxing his man on to make these waves so that they don't meet the deadline and Triller has to default. And they might want to do this because the fight is a burden. It's a big risk, a $6 million risk.
Maybe they want to default.
And all of this is just a ruse. They're cutting their losses. They're willing to sacrifice that $1 million deposit because they could lose more than that actually trying to do the fight.
Peter Khan left him 2 weeks ago.
A little over 2 weeks ago, and it would have been a very awkward awkward situation. If one of the fighters is making all these waves, he just so happens to be the manager of one of those fighters, while he's also an executive at Triller. Conflict of interest, awkward situation. So a little over 2 weeks ago, this guy parts ways with Triller under circumstances that were not divulged. We don't know why he left. We don't know what led to the split. We just know that he's not with them anymore. But he is still involved in this fight. 2 weeks ago, he quits. 2 weeks later, all of this stuff starts up. And I reiterate, this could be Peter Khan's way of sticking it to Triller by way of his fighter, or this could be Peter doing a favor to Triller by delaying.
By having his fighter hold up the fight.
Because if they do that long enough, Triller will have to default, and the fight will go to someone else. It won't be their problem anymore. It would cost them $1 million, but it could cost them more than that, so long as the fight stays their responsibility. We talked about those two scenarios. A separate scenario, a third, is that Peter Khan left Triller a little over 2 weeks ago because he knew about Triller's inner workings, and he was privy to information you don't have. Maybe he knows Triller ain't good for the money, and maybe that's why George Kambosos Jr. now is weary of their ability to pay him those monies. Maybe Peter Khan left Triller a little over 2 weeks ago because so long as he was employed by that company, he couldn't coax his fighter to start making waves.
Conflict of interest.
Can't have his fighter raising this big stink so long as he's employed by that company, so he leaves the company. 2 weeks later, his fighter starts raising a stink. He says he wants Triller to be found in default. He says they should be barred from any future purse bids.
Maybe Peter's coaxing him to say this.
Because Peter Khan knows Triller's inner workings. Because Peter Khan used to work there.
Maybe that's why George is weary.
The letter sent to the IBF is from George Kambosos' attorney, Greg Smith. But the move itself may be orchestrated by none other than Peter Khan, based on his time at Triller and his understanding of their inner workings.
They couldn't have done this more than 2 weeks ago.
Because more than 2 weeks ago, Peter was still with them. He was still working at Triller. More than 2 weeks later, he's not with them anymore. All of this stuff starts up, and it's because underneath it all, they're suspicious of Triller. They don't think they can pay the scratch, pay the cash.
That's the third scenario.
Peter Khan knew that Ryan's a scam artist and Triller is a sinking ship, and he decided to step down 2 weeks ago so that they could pursue this course of action, because they wouldn't have been able to so long as he worked there.
Conflict of interest.
In his time there, his short time there, because Triller hasn't even been around that long, he saw what that place really was, what was really going on.
He got the hell out of there.
This story has been so fluid that I'm not even sure what direction it's going to go into next. Nothing would surprise me, and there might be more updates to it by the time this video is uploaded, because news in the sport of boxing is fluid and ever-changing. Who knows what the hell might happen? But that's more or less what I think is going on here.
Yeah, something along those lines.
In any event, Triller winning that purse bid wasn't the blessing that everyone thought it was, and this has turned into a much bigger kerfuddle than any of us anticipated. In other news, per tweet from Michael Benson, Big John Fury, the father of Tyson Fury, surprisingly courteous and merciful to Anthony Joshua on the heels of his latest defeat. He said, "When your plan ain't working, it's up to the corner to switch it up." And they never did. They didn't try and change it. It's his corner's fault. Give AJ a break. It wasn't all AJ's fault. It was his corner. And I don't know
John said that.
why John Fury is choosing to be as
Diplomatic.
considerate to Anthony Joshua as he is. He could decide to kick AJ while he's down, like many others are. I think John is showing a lot of character here, if I'm being honest, and if I'm being completely honest, I'm a little bit surprised.
I think it's noble of him.
Classy, even, to extend that consideration, that courtesy to Anthony Joshua. Those Brits, they're real big on class, ain't they? I don't know if it's the father in John Fury, looking at the situation and reacting to it the way that he is. I don't know if it's a,
Disgust.
Disgust with the spectators in this spectator sport, the pundits of pugilism, the people that are already writing Anthony Joshua off so soon. You know, one day he's the British boxing scene's darling, their sweetheart, their man. The next minute, he's being lambasted
Blasted.
by those same Brits. He sees this, and he doesn't like what he sees. He thinks people need to give AJ a break, and if I'm being honest, I do too, because most people are using this as an indictment against Anthony Joshua. And I reiterate, it's not an indictment on him. It's not because he's not a good fighter that he lost on Saturday. It's because Usyk is just a better fighter, or at least he was that night. Ahead of this fight, and I can't stress this enough, Usyk was already perceived to be a potential banana skin for Anthony Joshua. Even among people that picked Anthony Joshua to beat him, guys like me, we knew there's a chance Usyk could win this fight.
He's a threat.
The lens the fight is being viewed in is something along the lines of Usyk being Anthony Joshua's Leon Spinks to Ali or Douglas to Tyson, and this ain't that kind of situation. That really ain't the case. Usyk winning this fight wasn't far-fetched at all. He's an Olympic gold medalist, a former undisputed cruiserweight champion, and he was perceived in most, if not all circles, as a credible threat to Anthony Joshua. And that's not because Anthony Joshua is not a good fighter. He's a good fighter, but so is Usyk. Usyk is proven to be a great fighter. At least he was the greater fighter the night of the fight. Could that change in a rematch? I don't know. I'm not a fucking fortune teller. If I could tell you the future, I would have told you Usyk was going to win the fight.
But I did tell you there's a chance he could.
But apparently to USA Today's Josh Peter, Anthony Joshua, he just lost to some nobody. In his opinion, Anthony Joshua showed he is boxing's reigning champion, choke artist, and loss to Alexander Usyk. This
Garbage.
And rest assured, this is garbage. This is a piece of trash that's supposed to pass for an article about boxing. The first sentence tells you everything you need to know about Josh Peter and his knowledge of the sport. He starts off by asking, it was clear as ever on Saturday when he being Anthony Joshua, lost to Alexander Usyk of the Ukraine. Who is Alexander Usyk, you ask? Exactly. And I reiterate, that tells you everything you need to know about Josh Peter and his understanding of boxing, because if you have to ask who Alexander Usyk is...
Do you not follow boxing?
A couple of casuals having a conversation and making snap judgments and giving bad takes on the sport, that's one thing, but this is actually a paid pundit to some degree. Somebody's paying this guy to write about a sport.
A sport he clearly doesn't follow.
Because if you actually follow the sport and you're familiar with the fighters, you won't be that shocked. You won't be that surprised that Alexander was able to pull it off. Even if you're like me and you picked Anthony Joshua to win the fight, you still knew there's a chance he could lose this thing. Not because he's no good, but because
Usyk's a quality fucking operator. He's not some club fighter.
Josh Peter felt it necessary to ask, who is Alexander Usyk, to try and make a point. I guess the point he was making is that because the reader likely isn't familiar with Usyk, that's an indictment on who? Usyk?
If you don't know who Usyk is, then you don't know much about boxing.
He's an Olympic gold medalist who became an undisputed champion in the cruiserweight division in a monumental run that I think is going to be very hard to duplicate. And that wasn't even that long ago. And if you don't already know this stuff, why the hell do they have you writing about boxing? Because it's either you're saying what you're saying due to sheer ignorance, or you know who these guys are and you know what happened, and this is just a failed attempt at humor.
There's enough bad takes in boxing. We don't need yours.
The lens many people try to view this fight in, and its outcome, is that Anthony Joshua is not a good fighter because he lost to Usyk, when the reality of it is they're both quality operators, they were both standout amateurs, both guys got gold medals in the Olympics, and both guys were world champions in the pros, competing at the very highest levels of the sport.
Usyk won.
Anthony Joshua, he just didn't have the right game plan. He didn't impose his size, he didn't impose his power, he fought to the level of the little man, and it costed him. He tried to box with the boxer, and you know what the rule of thumb is. You fight the boxer and box the fighter.
But Usyk's no mug.
The way this headline would have you believe, he'd have you believe Anthony Joshua lost his titles to a guy who took a couple of boxer-size classes. No. He lost to a quality operator like himself. And it happens when you compete at that level consistently. Now maybe, just maybe, the reason that John Fury is extending that courtesy to Anthony Joshua in defeat is because of guys like Josh Peter
Want to trash Anthony Joshua
unjustly. Maybe that's why he wants to extend that courtesy, that consideration, that olive branch to his compatriot. Maybe that's why. I'm not sure.
I just know it was a classy thing to do.
John Fury, he's got his thoughts on that situation, and so does his brother, Peter Fury, who lended some professional insights by way of social media on what Anthony needs to improve upon. Adjustments for Anthony Joshua: 1, better variation on the jab; 2, know how to use correct angles to walk a guy down; 3, know when hands go up and go down; 4, how to read feints and respond; 5, body attacks; 6, use size properly; 7, make smaller man work without landing. He added, you can't just walk down Usyk. He holds power, and southpaws have double when you walk into them, more so than orthodox fighters. It's not what he did wrong, it's how good Usyk is. To step to that level, he needs more tools. in his bag.
And that's what I thought we were going to see on Saturday.
Different variations of the jab, varied use of it to not just jab at Usyk's head, but to jab at his chest if his head proves too hard to hit. Aim that jab at a bigger target that he can't so easily move off the line. I also expected to see Anthony take stabs at Usyk's midsection, the way he did in the Povetkin fight with Alexander.
Jabbing at his body.
To help control the distance at which the fight is being fought and simultaneously
Take the air out of Usyk's tires.
but we didn't see that varied use of the jab in this past Saturday's fight. Eddie Hearn has confirmed that he's already received approaches to take Alexander Usyk versus Anthony Joshua 2 to the Middle East. He said the UK remains the first choice, but will also consider Usyk's request of Ukraine and look at financials of that option. And look, the fight's gonna go wherever it makes the most money. And if that's the UK, then that's the UK. If that's the Ukraine, that's the Ukraine. If it's Saudi Arabia, then it's Saudi Arabia.
Same situation as the Ruiz fights.
The Ruiz rematch. You know, ahead of that rematch, there was all this talk that there's no way they're going to do it in Anthony Joshua's neck of the woods, and there's no way they're going to do the fight in Saudi Arabia. They're going to do it where Ruiz wants it, this and that. But in the end,
They didn't do it in the States.
and they didn't do it in Mexico the way some people suggested, the way some people expected. In the end, it was Matchroom's choice, and they did the fight where the fight got the most money. That was Saudi Arabia. Pretty sure the same is going to apply here with this rematch. Eddie Hearn on meeting with Anthony Joshua yesterday, the first thing I said, I have to ask, do you want the rematch with Alexander Usyk? He looked at me like he was going to strangle me. He said, fucking right I do. He looked like he was about to chin me.
So, okay, the rematch is underway.
These Olympians, these medalists, like an Anthony Joshua, they're supreme competitors and they have their pride. It's not surprising that he wants to run it back.
Yeah, I don't think it's just spin from Eddie Hearn.
It could be because, well, that's what promoters do. Promoters promote. Anthony Joshua is still his fighter for the entirety of Anthony Joshua's career. What remains of it? But I don't think it's spin. Anthony Joshua has seen himself in this situation before where he suffers a loss and he wants to go right back in there.
People are telling him not to.
Farrell Crotch doesn't like Anthony Joshua's chances in a rematch situation. Where have I heard that before?
Yeah, that's a new one.
That he might want to run it back and run it back immediately. That's not surprising.
He's definitely going to have to revamp the strategy.
He's done that before. He had to fight a very mature fight, very careful fight with Andy Ruiz as to deprive the smaller man of the opportunities he capitalized on in the first fight, and he did that. This situation, it's a little trickier. Usyk is a far better boxer than an Andy Ruiz with more ring savvy, more ring IQ. He's a southpaw.
He showed durability in this fight.
And we already know about his fitness. We already know about his engine.
Yeah.
Usyk is a 12-round fighter. Outthinking him didn't work, so the feeling is Anthony Joshua will approach this rematch as a blunt force object.
To enforce blunt force trauma.
Though I reiterate, if it really were that simple, it would have worked for Derek Chisora, and it didn't.
Just giving him the bum's rush.
Gotta have the same demeanor, the same attitude as Derek Chisora.
And then some, because this ain't easy.
It's not supposed to be.